So welcome back, everybody, and welcome to new folks who are joining us who are not part of the CODEX Institute this week. But I guess I wanted to welcome Janine Glathar from Bucknell University, Digital Scholarship and Pedagogy Specialist in GIS and Spatial Thinking. I think I got that right.
It's a long title.
Yeah. We have a lot of projects this inaugural year in CODEX that have a mapping component to them. And so we really, when we were looking at the teams and the proposals that were coming this year, we really knew that we wanted to have, at least a session devoted to general mapping questions, and also to offer some expertise and some help, to individual help to the teams. And so I reached out to Janine, and she was kind enough and willing to help us with this. And Bucknell, if you don't know, Bucknell is I would call a leader in the liberal arts, digital scholarship space. If you don't know, every year except this year, I think they put on an amazing digital scholarship conference that is highly student-centered, with student presentations and student faculty presentations, student ed tech presentations. Usually held in October, very much centered around liberal arts digital scholarship. So it's a great school and a great conference and a really great community too. Johnny echoing that. I guess without further ado, I also just wanted to describe a little bit the CODEX Institute here for those folks who are not participating this year. This workshop is part of a short workshop series that we're hosting for the CODEX Summer Institute. This is the Ohio 5 Collaborative for Digital Engagement and Experience. It's a new thing we're trying this year. It's an institute for teams of teaching faculty, librarians, technologists, and students, instructional technologists and students to come together to think about course design, course redesign, and just digital project design, sometimes co-curricular, that incorporates in a significant way a digital component that also aims to sort of cultivate a critical engagement with the technology in some of this work. The Institute, luckily this year we were able to actually get some funding to continue supporting the Institute for the next 3 years. So this is intended to be an in-person face-to-face institute, but hopefully at some point in the future we'll be able to do that. But in the meantime, we are trying out the virtual format this year, and we're going to learn how well that works, what we can do better, and what we can do differently when we do get to do it in person. So anyway, I'm done rambling. I don't want to take up too much more time. I wanted to turn this over to Janine. Maybe Eugene's on this call as well. Sorry. Turn this over to Janine to get us started. And I know there'll be some hands-on components and some links, resource sharing. And so we'll make sure to try to get links to everything here in the chat as well as we're following along. And any questions before I turn it over to Janine? Okay, excellent. Well, I'm going to go ahead and make you the host, Janine, and then I will relinquish control.
Sounds good. Before we start in, I just want to take a moment to introduce myself. As Ben said, my name is Janine Glathar, and I'm at Bucknell. I've been there 11 years as of this July, and with regards to the Digital Scholarship Conference, I just wanted to throw out there that in 2012, before we started with the Digital Scholarship Conference, we actually had a GIS and Spatial Thinking Conference that was the same model as Digital Scholarship. And I mention that because when I got to Bucknell, I had no previous experience in higher ed, and frankly, I did not know what digital scholarship was. So it came as a bit of a surprise to me a couple years in when I realized that a lot of the work that I was doing with faculty, I knew that it wasn't just GIS, because I'd done straight GIS, I'd done applied GIS, and what I was doing with faculty was much broader. I didn't know that it had a name until someone told me. And basically our digital scholarship program grew out of the immense interest among our faculty to do spatial thinking and mapping, but in unique, creative, custom ways. The other thing that I want to mention before we get started is that although what I do now is fairly technical at times, my undergraduate degree was in Russian literature and language and European history. So I come from a humanities background, and that's really been invaluable to me in working, especially with our humanities faculty, because there's such a range of applications of the tools and methods. And I really work hard to try to meet faculty where they're at and try to deeply understand what their learning goals are, instead of, you know, giving them a specific tool and telling them how to use the tool. I really work with them to understand their material, to help them come up with an assignment that's going to achieve the learning goals that they have for their students. Okay, so that's just a little background. The top of the Zoom chat has 2 links. One of them is to the slides that I'm going to go through. And you'll notice when I start sharing my screen in a second that actually a lot of what we're going to do is hands-on. So I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen.
Let me go and make you the host.
There we go. Okay, and I'm going to go into presentation mode here. Okay, so is everyone able to see my lead slide here, Ben?
Yes.
Okay, great. So just to give you a brief overview of what we're going to do, I'm going to talk a little bit about some assignments that I've done over the past few years that have been really successful. And I kind of want to go into a bit of an anatomy of how we implemented those assignments and what we have found to be best practices for us at Bucknell. And I say for us at Bucknell because I realize all institutions are different and have different kinds of support personnel. So please know that the sort of ideas that I'm putting out there are food for thought, and I recognize that they might not fit your specific goals, but I would be more than happy to have separate Zoom calls with you to sort of talk more specifically about your projects and, you know, think through with you ideas for how to implement mapping and spatial visualization in your assignment. So after we go through some of those examples, we're going to do some hands-on work in ArcGIS Online. That's the tool that we're going to be working with primarily today, that and a storymap tool. Again, I know that ArcGIS Online is not necessarily going to be the right solution for all of you, but given the broad range of projects and the fact that it's the tool that I use predominantly at Bucknell, I thought I would give you a sense of how I work with students in classes using that particular tool, but hopefully some of the ideas, well, I know that many of the ideas are going to be applicable to different tools if those end up being the best choice for you. Okay, so we're going to have some opportunities for questions and answers. The second hands-on section is going to be where each project group gets to work with what I'm calling a project sandbox map. I spent a lot of time reading through each group's proposals, and I really enjoyed seeing the exciting ideas that you have, and in some cases, the assignments that you've already been running with for a couple of years and are tweaking. And I created some map layers that I thought might at least speak to either some of the topics you're working with or perhaps some of the ideas that you put out in your proposals as things you might want to work on. So you'll have a chance to work in that sandbox map that has at least some vaguely relevant material to your project. And then last but not least, we'll spend a relatively short amount of time looking at a story map tool called Cascade. And I'll talk a little bit about how the students that I work with have been using that as both a tool for creating a showcase about the research they've done for their class-based assignment, and also a presentation tool for class presentations. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to just a few sort of best practices ideas, many of which I'm sure you are all already doing. The first one, faculty, staff, student partnerships in building and testing digital scholarship assignments. I know you're doing because the project groups have all come with this collaborative spirit. and the team already established. This has been something that's been incredibly fruitful for us because it helps faculty who have heavy teaching loads and research expectations move forward with innovative projects they might not have the wherewithal to do if they couldn't have a collaborative team working in tandem with them. So one of the things that we do a lot with our student researchers is we'll hire them for summer research work that helps build the materials that faculty might use for an in-class assignment. A lot of times those students work with us over their entire 4 years at Bucknell, so they might work on multiple digital scholarship assignments. They might also serve as TAs in the class. And in a lot of cases, these projects that we're doing in class tie in with faculty members' research. So the student researchers get to work on both ends of that, both creating materials that can be used for the classroom assignment, but also, in many cases, being co-authors or being mentioned in faculty publications. Okay, so with regards to assignments, and if I'm going too fast, please just raise your hand and let me know. I've been on basically a caffeine IV drip the last couple days, so I'm not quite sure what my speaking speed is at the moment. But the second thing that I want to throw out there is with working with undergrad in class assignments, this has been a really challenging thing for us to sort of manage. Well-defined, limited topic ideas for student projects is really essential. I kind of find that whenever we sit down initially to have conversations about the student assignment, we start out very broad and have to remind ourselves over and over and over that we will regret it if we don't narrow the focus, so that we know students will have sufficient materials that they can find for their topic, and hit all of the things that we want to hit, both technologically and methods and analysis wise. So some of what I'm going to show you in the next few minutes is class materials that we tend to create for virtually all of our digital scholarship assignments. And just to give you a sense of kind of the volume of work that we're doing, last semester, I was in 13 different classes, which was completely overwhelming. But what has worked really well for us is to have those faculty, staff, student teams create the assignment and tech resource guide templates for the students to use while they're working on the assignment, and all of the other things that go along with that. We create those collaboratively, usually with quite a lot of lead time. Sometimes we might start a year ahead of time with a summer research project that gets debuted a year later in a class. Other times, it's a shorter turnaround time, but we always have the collaborative team. And we have templates that we use that we've found to work well for our students. And also I mentioned earlier that a lot of the work that students are doing in class ties in with faculty research. So part of the reason that we've really sort of steered towards some standardized templates is that students do amazing work in the context of a class, and oftentimes a faculty person wants to migrate that work, obviously with the student's permission, to their body of research. That's hard to do if we've got 25 different students using 25 different ways of documenting their work. So having some standardized templates that we use helps us at the end sift through student work, pull out the things that we want to migrate to research, and then build slowly over time. Okay, and the last sort of thing that I want to talk about is the in-class work sessions and the out-of-class work sessions. I do go into class sessions and teach students how to use the mapping tool, teach them how to use the storymap tool, but I don't do that alone. I am always working with a faculty member but also typically with one of our librarians. And in many cases, the student who partnered with us on the original course materials might come in as a TA. And that's important because we work really hard on integrating the technology tools with the content. And I am clearly not a subject matter expert in most of the classes that I go into, although I did have a wonderful opportunity to work on mapping Leo Tolstoy's literary estates in a class. So that was exciting because I was a subject matter expert on that. So we have this team, and at this point we've worked together for long enough that it's pretty easy for us to make sure that the student's question goes to the right person and that they get the right kind of help. And that continues outside of the classroom. We typically have a couple different rounds of out-of-class work sessions. If the students are working on a group project, we might meet with the entire group. If it's an individual assignment, we'll meet with individuals. I know a number of you, as we all are, have been contemplating this hybrid or fully online semester or year that awaits us. One thing that I'm sure you all have experienced from the spring, if you were teaching, is that providing that kind of support that students need to get through the research process and sort of make that pivot from their research to creating their scholarship, it takes a lot of, you know, hands-on time. So this past summer, or like 2 weeks ago, I was in a class with 25 students, and those out-of-class work sessions were like 2 weeks of my life. Basically, you know, students often had 2, 3, 4 out-of-class work sessions with me. They were very fruitful, and when the projects were turned in, both the faculty member and I were exceedingly happy, but it's exhausting providing that required level of out-of-class support for students during the project. But you know, we found that that's really essential. And then the last thing that I want to mention here, because this is something that keeps sort of coming back for us as something we need to work on, is we really need to take time at the end of the semester to have a mind meld of the faculty member, me, the librarian, the student TA, to, you know, really sort of figure out what went well, what went poorly, and most importantly, to right then and there at the end of the semester assign tasks for who is going to take maybe those things that didn't go well, and what specifically are they going to do to fix them. Because, you know, I'm sure you all have had this feeling before. You're in the middle of a semester, something's not quite working right, you're not loving it. You know, you make notes, but for whatever reason, a year later, you're teaching the class again, you get to that point and you're like, right, that's the thing that I meant to re-engineer. And yet here I am right now in class, I haven't re-engineered it. It's gonna have to wait another year. So we've been trying to hold ourselves accountable for doing that brain dump right at the end of the term and giving ourselves specific tasks so that we're not stuck, you know, with those little potholes in the assignment. Okay, so the next thing that I want to do, I'm going to go ahead and get out of the full screen mode, and I want to show you some examples of some assignments. So the first one that I want to show you is from a first semester, first year student class. It's a foundation seminar, which all incoming students are required to take. This one was on humanities visualization. And basically the students use different tools, you know, network analysis tools, timeline tools over the course of the semester to analyze different texts. So for Kate Chopin's Awakening, the faculty member wanted to do some mapping and have students create a story map to reflect on that novel. So we had a lot of meetings, and the faculty member had their assignment, which unfortunately I was not able to find in my labyrinth of Google Docs, but I have my ArcGIS Online guide from when I went into the class and taught the students how to use the mapping tool. So what I want to point out here is that what we try to do with these sessions where we introduce the tool is teach them the tool, but more importantly, point out how they are to be applying that tool to their analytical tasks. So there's a lot in here that's just kind of getting them up and running with using the tool, but then we start talking about some of the map layers that were created for them to use in this particular assignment. So basically, our assignments in general require the students to create some data of their own, but we essentially seed them with some starter map layers that either they might not be able to technically create on their own using ArcGIS Online, because these might be thematic map layers that are more challenging to create in that tool, or we don't want their entire experience with the tool to be having to start from scratch. So I'm going to show you the data dictionary for this project. So we start the students with a class map and with a data dictionary. And what we're trying to do is model for them the importance of considering these map layers as resources, the same as they would evaluate a data set in a tabular format or a text, or maybe an image resource. So we have the map layers with a description, a link to the data source, and if we're using data, for example, like census data, this is historical census data, we include a code book. So we're trying to model for them best practices, and we're also trying to give them this head start on, in this case, thinking through this novel and putting it in its historical context in the 19th century. So you can see that as we go through this resource guide, there's lots of questions that ask them about the area that the novel is set in, but then as we go further down here, prompts them to think about the historical context, not just the geographic context, but the historical context in which the novel is set. So I'm going to show you the class map. So for example, one of the map layers that we have them look at is water versus rail access, to sort of help them understand New Orleans' history as an important port, and to also sort of understand its historical context in terms of population demographics. So one of the things that we have them look at is the French-born population by county in 1890. Okay, so they can see that this is a heavily, or that there's a large French immigrant population in that particular area, which is relevant to the book and some of the themes that they're learning about there. We also have a map layer on women's suffrage, so that they can understand essentially the timing of women's suffrage in the South as compared to, my map layers sometimes don't like to perform when I'm on Zoom. Sorry about the slow loading time. So that they can understand the historical context with regards to suffrage and which regions granted women the right to vote earlier versus later.
Janine?
Yes.
Could I interrupt for, there's a question in the chat, and since we're here,
yeah, absolutely, please.
Hoda is asking, where are these layers coming from? Is there an open source for this information, or is this stuff that your team created for the class?
I'm going to go back to the dictionary, and the answer is that, hold on, I'm going to turn off my little alarm that's going to go off in a second. The answer is that all of these map layers were created from resources that are available online publicly for free. However, it took some effort and grunt work to get them into the format that you see them in the map. So for example, we mine the National Historical GIS website extensively for this and many classes. And what you get there is you can download what are called boundary files that show US counties of different historical decades. And you can also download tabular data. So for example, the French-born population in 1890. But you can join those two things together to create a map layer like I just showed you in ArcGIS Online. That's a relatively new piece of functionality that came out in the last couple of years. Typically, we have our student researcher learn ArcGIS Pro or ArcMap, which is a desktop GIS tool to do at least some of the data creation. Okay, so other map layers in here might have been CSV files, which can very easily be added directly to ArcGIS Online. So that's a great question. We don't subscribe to any GIS data websites. We kind of create our own as we go, and it's a combination of the student worker and I and the faculty member thinking through what we want to create, and then the student worker spends a lot of time doing work sessions with me to learn how to do the technical work they need to do to create those map layers and publish them. Okay, so I'm running a little bit long on time here, so I'm going to move away from this project and show you a different example. This is from a senior level course, Econ 418, American Economic History. It's a senior seminar. And in this case, students do a series of 4 labs. And the emphasis, the class is about the regionalization of the US economy from 1790 to 1940. So students use a combination of what I call feature layers, things like railroads and canals or canal cities or you know, ports that traded in enslaved persons, things that are locations or travel paths, or they use those in conjunction with thematic map layers, things like you know, by US county, where was grain being produced versus cotton, etc. So this map, this document that we're looking at right now is the econ professor's prompt for the students for this first lab. She is notorious for having extremely long prompts with lots of questions for the students to answer. To go along with her prompt that explains what she wants out of them in terms of economic analysis, we have, again, one of these online resource guides where I walk the students through, in an in-person session, how to use the tool, but we immediately kind of jump into how to apply the tool to answer questions that they might have. So I'm going to scroll down here to get to a section where we have them create some map layers on manufacturing versus agriculture, right? So we lead them into a little bit of a trap here where we have them take the 1820 census data and draw the counties from light to dark based on the number of persons employed in manufacturing, right? And then we have them do the same thing with them, the same map layer, but a different variable where they're looking at persons employed in agriculture. And it's a trap because we have them using this raw data that's not normalized for population. So what they kind of know from reading their book is that the South dominated in agriculture, specifically cotton, and the North in manufacturing. When they look at these map layers that are shown here, they can't see that because the data is not normalized. So we have them go back and normalize the data for population, and then they can see more clearly this pattern of manufacturing being the dominant employer in the North and agriculture being the dominant employer in the South. So I'm going to show you the data dictionary for this one. It's monumentally huge. So basically, it's got a couple hundred map layers. They don't use all of these map layers. The idea is that they are supposed to be led by their understanding of economics and the different patterns that are emerging in regions of the US. And they are supposed to mine the map layer data to sort of confirm their hypotheses and support the arguments that they're making. Okay, so you can see here that we've got individual tabs for the code books for the specific census years. I'm going to show you kind of how we take them from that slightly overwhelming lab prompt and data dictionary to what they are tasked with creating. What we ask students to create in response to each of these labs, there's 5 of them, is a story map. So they work in groups and they get up and they present with their group from the perspective of the region they've been assigned. They might be assigned to the Northeast or the South or the West. And they present the sort of underpinnings of their economy at various points in time in the form of a story map. So we start them out with this slide worksheet where we try to model what we want them to create. So I'm going to show you the story map. Unfortunately, it's not loading correctly because it's summer and we're in the process of migrating a lot of map services. So some of them are dead. But basically on the left, there is a place where they develop their arguments. And then on the right, we ask them to present visual evidence, either in terms of images or map layers, to support that argument. And we ask them to use the story map slide worksheet to do that. And part of the reason that we asked them to use a slide worksheet is that we found that they got excited looking at the story map tool and they wanted to just dive in and be led by the tool. And they weren't organizing their thoughts into sort of succinct arguments the way that we wanted them to. So we asked them to first work exclusively with the slide worksheet template, which asks them to break their arguments down into roughly 6 to 10 slides, describe their key argument, list their citations, and then think through the visualizations they want to use to explain those arguments. We give them a sample slide worksheet that's already filled out, and then we also give them a blank one that they make a copy of for themselves. Okay, so that has worked really well. And we have a rubric for creating the story map that incorporates sort of obviously their economic analysis, but we ask them to be accountable for some best practices. So for example, they need to be writing full sentences and paragraphs. We don't want bullet points. The story map should stand as a standalone. It should be able to speak for itself. They should be able to send the link to a family member who would understand something about what was happening in the economy of the region at that point. So we try to be very clear in our expectations, and I think we're in the fall, it'll be year 6 of teaching this class. So it's worked really well. Students seem to like it. This will be the first time I've done it remotely, so we're going to reapproach it a little bit. I'm not 100% sure how yet, but the last example that I want to show you, I'm going to close some of these tabs because Zoom does not love it when you have lots of tabs open. The last example that I want to show you is from just the last couple of weeks. I know we all have concerns about teaching online. The summer course that I taught was a biology class for non-majors, the general requirement. It fulfills the general requirement. And it was a 6-week course that was fully online, partially comprised of Bucknell students, partially Lewisburg high school students. So it was a real hodgepodge. And the faculty member and I really wanted to provide the students with structure to help them succeed. So we customized a template that the faculty member thought would work well for this class. So basically, the assignment was for the students to create a case study about a zoonotic emerging infectious disease. So there were 25 students that each picked a different pathogen. And the faculty member wanted them to follow a very regimented case study structure with 7 sections listed here. She wanted them to do a bibliography in Zotero, and we asked them to create a story map as their final product. The way that we structured it is I popped into the class at the very beginning to show them an example of what a story map looks like, so that they would know eventually what they were shooting for. But in addition to that, at that first meeting that the first class session I came to, oops, I picked the wrong one, sorry about that. There we go. We gave them this structured template. This is an example of a student's completed template, but basically there was a page for each of the required sections of the case study where they were to draft their text, list their citations, and also start dropping in images or image links and ideas for map layers that they wanted to include in the story map. So we asked the students to work exclusively in this template for weeks 1 through 4. The template was due the end of the 4th week, and then the last 2 weeks of the course, they worked on transferring their structured research notes materials to a story map template. This was the first time ever that I actually created a, let's see here, created a template that we asked everyone to use. So essentially all of the students started from a ready-to-go template that had the sections blocked out. And I had placeholder text in there to give them an approximate idea of how much text they should have in each section. And then the students, when it got time to actually develop the story map, went in and replaced the placeholder images and text with their own research notes. It worked extremely well. The story maps were some of the best story maps I've seen. I was really kind of surprised. Both the faculty member and I felt a little bit odd about having it so highly structured, but it worked really well across the board. Students were able to figure out how to create the story maps. They had a requirement to embed at least one interactive map and or immersive section, which is the thing that you're seeing here as I scroll. I'll show you the student's map, and then I'll talk to you about how we created that. So in this particular case, the student was showing documented countries with documented cases of plague. So in yellow, these were countries that had less than 100, orange, between 100 and 1,000 cases, and red, more than 1,000. So I'll show you real quickly. I'm running super late on time, I apologize. This is the data dictionary. So given the fact that this was a six-week course, I had the students find the data source for the map layers, and then I actually created the map layers behind the scenes for them, because the deal was essentially that if they found a table that had data, like in this case it was a list of countries with number of cases of plague, I could very quickly and easily create the thematic map layer for them and share it with them, and they could incorporate it in their story map. Okay. In general, if we were in normal circumstances, I would have had one of my student assistants creating these map layers from the tables the students provided. But since I was working from my dining room, it was me. So I'm going to go back to my presentation here. Those are three very different classes, but as you can see, kind of the approach was the same. And they've all been pretty successful for us. I know that it's not necessarily, you know, different institutions have different sort of approaches. So I'm not suggesting this is like a cookie cutter, but this has worked really well for us. So before I move on to the hands-on piece of this, I guess I just want to know if anyone has any questions or sort of responses or any feedback that they want to share right now.
Janine, this is Heather. AJ had a question about metadata. AJ, did you want to say more about that?
Yeah, I was just, while I was listening, since part of our project that we're doing doesn't have like an online data set already created, and I'm trying to figure out the metadata by myself and figuring out like what pieces are actually going to be useful and what pieces are not. I was just kind of wondering what kind of steps do you take with your students or with yourself to like understand which metadata is actually like useful and which metadata is probably best not to be used.
That's a great question, and it's a hard one for me to answer. I can say that this was a bit of a challenge for me in the biology class that I just showed you examples from, because of all the subjects that I'm not an expert in, biology is probably the one I'm least expert in. We did have a science librarian working with us, and that was extremely helpful in sort of parsing out, you know, excellent sources from not as great sources. But as far as figuring out whether the table or the piece of information you find is going to translate well into a map layer, I mean, I can sort of look at things because I've done this for so long and figure that out. But a lot of times when I'm working with my student researchers, we spend a lot of time playing with the data, you know, creating a mock-up of a map layer with it and see if it sort of does what we hope it does and think it does. And if it doesn't, we go back to the well. It's a lot of trial and error. And, you know, it is a big time sink. I gotta say the data creation piece of this is a big time sink. It has a big payoff because students can really have those aha moments when they can see the pattern that they might have thought was going on when they read through the articles or, you know, worked with their source materials, but then actually being able to see it borne out in the map layer is really powerful. But there's just a lot of grunt work. There's a lot of sitting there with the data and playing with it until it kind of works. But I'd be more than happy to have separate Zoom calls with different project groups to talk specifically about your data and maybe give some advice or some thoughts, because I did spend a lot of time actually trying to find data sort of related to your project. So, you know, I have at least a tiny bit of familiarity with those subjects on that front. Any other questions before we move on to the hands-on stuff? Okay, so what I want to do next is ask you to go to that link I dropped at the very top of the chat. It's all the way up at the top. It's called, it's the second one. It's called ArcGIS Online Hands-on Work Session. Oops. There it is. I think it's the second one that Heather actually dropped in. Is that correct? I'm gonna go ahead and click on it and open it. Nope, it's not.
I think I reposted the right one just now in the.
There we go. All right, so what I tried to do here is twofold. One is I tried to create a sandbox for each project group. You know, again, I'm not part of your project teams and I'm not familiar necessarily with the topics, so I might have missed the mark in some cases. But what I want you to do right now is click on the link for your project group's map. So if you're one of the unaffiliated folks, just go ahead and click on the general interest map. Okay, but if you're from one of the project teams, click on your project map. For various reasons, I lumped together the Cicero and Reason and Romanticism groups, and I created two maps, so just pick one of them. And this first section that you're going to be doing hands-on work, I'm going to go ahead and open up the general interest map. This first section, each project map, regardless of which one you open, is going to have these three shared map layers: hospital locations in the United States, US state boundaries, and US counties with the number of COVID-19 cases. I apologize for the doom and gloom. I was trying to find a map layer that might be at least interesting to everyone. So each of you will see these map layers, and then what I want you to do is work at your own pace, going through this ArcGIS Online guide. It's exactly like the ones I create for my students. And I basically ask you to do some work that's going to help you get familiar with using ArcGIS Online. Okay, so go ahead and open up the map. You're going to have to sign in. I'm going to move my little Zoom window here. You'll sign in exactly the same way that you did yesterday when I emailed you your login credentials. So you'll click the sign in button and you'll drop your CODEX username and password into the login box. Mine opened up, I think, off screen. I'm going to go ahead and I'll grab one of the logins that's not being used. Actually, I won't. I think you all can. Go ahead and log in with your CODEX credentials. I'm going to log in a slightly different way as me. And once you have your map open, I'm going to just walk you through these first couple steps since we're running shorter on time. Okay, so I guess if you're having trouble logging in, could you please let us know in the chat and I can help you out? I guess maybe could you all wave a hand when you've actually logged in so I know who's in? Let's see. Oh, so when it asks you for if you want to use the map viewer beta, just say not now. They've been pushing that for a good solid 6 months now and it's making me nuts. So just say not now and then it'll take you into the map, okay? So once you've logged in successfully, you'll see your username in the upper right. It'll be something like participant 1 or participant 29 or whatever. If by some chance you see this in the left-hand corner, like basically just the name of the map and more details, click where it says content. Okay, the content view is where you want to be. It'll show you the list of map layers in your map. Okay? So before you start doing the things in that ArcGIS Online resource guide that I gave you, you're going to have to save your own copy of the map. So click where it says save and do save as. I always like to have people give it their name. Okay. And then I'm going to stop my share for a second and reshare a different browser. I want to show you one more thing before we move on and you work at your own pace. So let's see here. All right, so I think maybe I shared the wrong thing again. Let me share my screen using the correct one. Let's see. Does everyone see my map now with Ohio? Okay, great. So you're gonna click the save button and do save as. You'll give the map a name, and what I want to, and then you'll hit save map. What I want to show you, and I have this in the resource guide, is I want to show you where your stuff lives in ArcGIS Online so you know how to get back to it. Once you've saved the map, click the home button in the upper left and go to content. And each of you should have just one item in your, well, I've got a couple because I've been playing with stuff, but you'll have just that one thing, the map that you just made a copy of, okay? So that's where your stuff lives in ArcGIS Online. And to get back into it, to do the little exercise, click where it says Janine's CODEX map, or click where it, on the name of your map. And it takes you to a metadata page, and then you have to click open map viewer. And I'm gonna say yes, open the map, because I was doing some stuff with this, okay? So once you're back in the map, just go ahead and follow along with those instructions that I gave you. And I'm gonna give us like maybe 15 minutes to play around with this, okay? So go ahead and work at your own pace, and in about 15 minutes, I'll check in, and in the meantime, if you have any questions, just put them in the chat, and I'll do my best to answer them, okay? All right.
Hi, Janine.
Yeah.
I'm still stuck on where you got all this data. It's really cool. From what I can tell, some of these are just images that are superimposed onto the map, but
Yes.
other of these have like major tables behind them. Where did you get it? Where did you get all this information?
So yeah, so what you're seeing with those images are geo-rectified historical maps. And, you know, I've got the sources listed there. One of them is like, I'm gonna open up the data dictionary. One was in a British Encyclopedia of History. Let me pull open the data dictionary so I can.
Like for example, like I'm looking at the old war, like the ones with like trade routes where there's like multiple cities, and then there's like these major.
Yep, hold on, I'm gonna actually just go ahead and share my screen so I can make sure that we're talking about the same thing. All right, so let me get to the data dictionary here. All right, and I'm sorry, which project group were you?
The Ottoman Mediterranean one.
Yep. Oh, you know what? I was really struggling with finding any interesting data until I found this thing called the Old World Trade Routes Project.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to open up your map and see if those are the map layers that you're talking about.
They are. Yeah, those are the ones that are really heavy with the, like they have like
So
location. Yeah.
I would be more than happy to do a Zoom call to show you all what I did with that data, because finding it was a real coup for me, but then downloading it and getting it into a format that you're looking at in the map was a different set of challenges. And I can show you how I did what I did. It took some jumping through hoops.
Yeah, that would be really cool. We'll try to get on your schedule for the next day.
Yeah, and if anyone is interested in any of the data that's in your sandbox map, or if you're dipping into other people's sandboxes and see something you like, I am more than happy to share the raw data with you. And I think I know you all have ArcGIS Online accounts for your universities. So the other kind of nifty thing that I can do is I can actually transfer or copy the map services to your organization if you want. I do that when I work with class projects that are for external clients. If they have an ArcGIS Online account, we can transfer the entire map and all of the map services to their ownership so they can do whatever they want with them.
That's pretty awesome. Thank you.
Sure.
Yeah, and we checked ahead of time with each of the colleges to make sure everyone had access to Arc Online, and yeah, everyone does. And I know some of the people here were people that I contacted. So, but if anyone is unsure about how to gain access to that, there is somebody that can help you.
Okay, so I guess I want to first ask if there was any questions or comments or feedback that anyone has based on the small amount of time that you spent working with the tool. I want to emphasize that ArcGIS Online is the tool that I use. It might not be the right fit for you, but my hope is that at least some of the types of map layers that you're getting a chance to work with will give you some ideas of what might be possible for your own project. So are there any questions?
I do see one from Diego in the chat.
Okay.
Is it difficult to create a new map layer with your own symbols and routes?
Yep. So the answer is kind of depends on what you want to create. So I'm still sharing my screen, right? Yeah. So towards the very end of the assignment, I showed you how to add map notes. Map notes are one very easy way to annotate a map and to add your own information. They're not the best way to add large quantities of information. But basically, with map notes, what you do is you click the add button and choose map notes. You give it a name. of some sort and hit create. And then essentially you get a set of points, lines, and polygons that you can use to add to the map. So you can type in the name of a location. I taught English in Kadina a long time ago. You can either search for a location and hit add to map notes and it creates it for you, or you can create the map notes layer like I just showed you by going to add map notes, and then grabbing a push pin or a line or a polygon. You can add in a title and some information about the place mark. You can change the symbol to something prettier. I think they use this sort of yucky default color by default to force you to change it. So that's one quick and easy way to get data into the map. But to get more interesting stuff in, you can add a CSV file with location information to ArcGIS Online. And I was going to do that, but I thought we just didn't really have time during this particular workshop. But I can have a separate Zoom call to show people how to do that. So if you have, for example, a list of sample locations with X, Y coordinates, or a list of maybe protest events with a city and country and a year, you can get those into a CSV format and import them into ArcGIS Online, and they get drawn as a point layer. If you have tabular data, so for example, if you had data for counties in the United States or provinces in a country, you would have to have two things to get that into the map. One is a boundary file showing the geographies of those areas, and then the other is the table, and you'd have to do something called a join to add those attributes to the boundary files so that they can be drawn in the map, like this COVID incident rate data is. I've got to get out of Lithuania, get back to the United States. There we go. And you can do that in ArcGIS Online. There's in analysis, there is a tool. I never remember where it is. I guess it's in here somewhere.
I mean, do you think you could share, we're seeing both the
sure,
Firefox and the site. It's just a little bit small. I wonder if you could share the browser.
Share screen and grab Mozilla instead. There we go. Okay, so
perfect.
In analysis, you click the analysis button and you get all these different options. Under summarize data, there's a tool called join. And if you point to a boundary file and a table, which I don't have in this particular map, you can do a join based on common fields in both the boundary file and the table with attribute information. The caveat with that is that the values have to match exactly. And again, I could sort of like have a separate Zoom call with you to talk about that. I typically don't use ArcGIS Online to create these kind of map layers. I call these thematic map layers. I typically create them in ArcGIS Pro, but you can create them in ArcGIS Online. And I actually had some data set up for you where I was going to have you do that. I just kind of felt like it would take us down a different road. The other thing that you can do to get data into ArcGIS Online is as a zipped shapefile. The last thing I want to show you is if you go to the add button and search for layers. By default, it'll look at your content or your groups, but there's this thing called Living Atlas. It doesn't really have historical data, but it has a plethora of current day demographic data for the whole world, a lot of natural resource data. Then lastly, there's the whole wild, wild west of ArcGIS Online, where some of them are really authoritative map layers. Like actually I got this COVID-19 layer sort of from the general pool, but then others are just map layers created by students at schools, and they may or may not be authoritative, may or may not be good. But that's a great question. And honestly, the data creation is the single biggest time sink. It's so one of the things that I spent a lot of time talking with faculty members about is which map layers do we want to create ahead of time for the students, knowing that they're important, but would be challenging it would be a forced march to get the students to create them on their own, and which are the ones that are most important for the students themselves to be actively engaging with and creating. Okay, any other, oh, I see two more chat things here. Let me open it up. Can you use different styles to represent data? Yes, other than what ArcGIS offers. Yes, in the bottom, yeah. Yes, so I think someone actually answered the question from AJ, or did that answer the question? You are somewhat limited in the symbology options in ArcGIS Online. So yeah, there are pluses and minuses of this specific tool. Okay, any other questions before we move on? Okay, so the next thing that I wanted to do is give you, oh, I'm sorry, I wanted to actually just go through a couple things in case people didn't necessarily make it through all of the key parts of the hands-on exercise. So just wanted to underscore a couple key concepts and things about working with the map layers. You know, so you turn them on or off by clicking or unclicking them on the left here. If you hover over map layers, you can get to different properties, including the table. The table is the real sort of gold mine in a lot of cases for the map layer. So this is COVID testing locations in the US. And right now they're being symbolized based on the type of test that they perform. If you scroll through the table, you can get a sense of what information is available. And start to think about what you may or may not be able to do in terms of visualizing it. Yeah, at this point, we're pretty far behind. The next thing that I had scheduled for us was sandbox time. And that's basically just spending a few minutes working with the map layers that were created for your specific project. Okay, so I do want to make sure that we get to story maps. So why don't we take like the next, like take until 3 p.m. if that works for people, to just continue exploring ArcGIS Online, specifically the map layers that were created for you. And then if you have any questions, put them in the chat, but also know that I can do a separate Zoom call with you if you're interested. Okay, so let's work until 3 o'clock in your project sandbox, and then we'll come back together and we'll talk about story maps. And I'll continue looking at the chat.
Janine, I might have a really general question just about the concept of a data dictionary in general and how that differs from, say, like the metadata schema that you need to populate a map. And I get, like, I'm thinking about AJ's question from before, because, you know, they're working from essentially a text, right? And then they're really trying to essentially mine for entities in that text and other, and that was AJ's question, sort of what are the elements that we need to mine for? So I guess it's just a general question about like that concept of the data dictionary. Is that the same thing as the schema or the metadata elements for each layer? Or just how do those two things relate to each other?
I muted myself because of my dogs. Sorry about that. No, and I'm glad you asked that question, because I'm sorry, when you asked that question the first time, AJ, I misunderstood it. Yeah, the schema that you would need to need students to populate in order to create a map layer is definitely different. And I mean, the rule of thumb is you need to have a list of records that represent locations. It could be a city and country, it could be an address, it could be XY coordinates. So you have the location information, and that's the primary piece of information that's going to get drawn in the map. It could be, instead of point locations, it could be provinces or countries, or trying to think of some non-administrative boundary, but could be an area of some sort. And then the attribute information that you collect is really specific to the project. But what I would say to that is that it's absolutely essential before students start the research project for the faculty member and the tech specialist and the rest of the team, the student researcher, to have exactly that conversation and to get very specific about what you want the students to parse out in their research and what you want them to put into their table that they're building. Using Google Docs is extraordinarily helpful because you can look at what students are doing in real time and make sure they're on track. There's an art to it, and it's challenging which is why I like to start projects with a class map that serves as an example for what the students are shooting for. But the templates that I've used with faculty work really hard to elicit that information. The goal is that students, if they're doing a close reading of a text, or they're looking at some historical text of some sort, we don't want them to have to go back through that multiple times to go find those locations. We want them, as they go, to make note of those locations, the page number, or whatever the reference is, the relevant information. But it's a lot of sort of, what's the word I'm looking for, trial and error behind the scenes before you even get to the assignment by the project team to figure out, okay, this is what we're shooting for, and this is what we want the students to be responsible for pulling from their texts or their travel journals or whatever. It's a great question.
Thank you.
Yeah, so we've got about a half an hour left here. Does anyone have questions or comments before we switch gears to the story map piece of things? I do realize that the bulk of what you all are focusing on right now is that bit that I just talked about, the data creation, and I know I'm giving it a little bit short shrift right now, but that's because I'm hoping that if we do individual project consults, maybe I can be more helpful to you in going, getting down to brass tacks, or, just based on some of the trial and error we've done over the 11 years that I've been here, and some of the, great student work that we've created that we then had to go back and recreate because, we kind of didn't get it quite right the first couple times. Okay, so I'm going to talk about story maps a little bit. And again, with the caveat that I know that Esri is not going to be the tool of choice for everyone. And story maps might not be part of what you want your students to do in their assignment. For most of the classes that I work with, students end up creating a story map. And the reason that that's kind of worked for us is that a lot of the faculty members that I work with like to have students do presentations at the end of the semester. A lot of them, might have their work in a symposium, like a residential college symposium or something like that. So they need some kind of artifact. Or maybe the class is tying into a faculty research project and the faculty member wants to have materials that they can use for a showcase. So for all those reasons, story maps work well for us. And what I want to show you now is something called the Cascade template. It's my favorite story map template. It's very pretty, it's slick, and it gives students a nice interface to do narrative text and to engage in sort of visual rhetoric. So we're looking at an example of a professional story map here. As I scroll through it, you can see that the content changes. it fits the bill for an academic assignment because students can write narrative text. They can also include citations, which I included in one of my examples. But they can be creative, and students really seem to enjoy that creativity. Story maps include narrative text, but also images and videos. You can embed a timeline if you do something like in timeline.js, or if you do something in another tool like a network analysis. You can embed various types of web applications into the story map itself and make it very dynamic. You obviously can also include interactive maps. But, you know, not all of the classes that, well, I'd say most of the classes that I work with have projects that are not map-centric. They might be text-centric, you know, or faculty member really wants the emphasis on the analysis. And the maps might be just a small part of the story map itself. Okay, so this is the template, the story map template that I've used, you know, most frequently over the last couple of years. So what I want to show you now is how you create such a thing. I'm going to stop my share here and share in my other browser. I apologize for the back and forth. There are technical reasons. I'm just logged into the same account as different people. So let's say you've created something that you want to publish as a story map. There's a couple ways that you can create the story map. One is from the map interface, which is what I'm going to show you. Actually, you know, maybe I'll show you the opposite. I'm going to save my map. Well, I'll show you both. You can click the share button in your map. You have to share the map with someone. It can be everyone, the organization, or just the members of your group. But you have to share it before this little button on the bottom called Create Web App opens up. You hit Create Web App. There's a bunch of different templates with a bunch of different sort of twists, like that Johns Hopkins COVID website that you've probably all seen in the news. That's a dashboard. But anyways, you pick your template. I'm going to type in Cascade, and when you poke around with this in a minute, I'll ask that you use Cascade as well. Type in a keyword, you click Select, Create Web App. I always have people call it Story Map so that they remember which is their map and which is their story map. And then you hit Done. It does its thing and takes you into this Cascade Story Map Builder. So it drops you with a default landing page, which you can customize. You can have a scrolling video in the background if you want, or just a static image. I'm just going to go ahead and drag and drop a picture into here. Let me just find a folder. All right, so I'm going to drag and drop an image here for the backdrop. It's a picture of my kids and my dogs. So once you have your initial image, when you scroll down, it assumes that since I published this from the map that I want to embed my interactive map in it. I'm going to pretend like I don't want to right now. I can click this little edit button in the bottom left and pick something different. Actually, you know what? I think I'm actually just going to keep that. What I want to show you is there's a little plus sign down here. You click on the little plus sign and you can pick what kind of section you want to add. So I'm going to add a text section, and I'm going to just type some random text. The idea is that you could start crafting your narrative in here. And maybe I've written my introduction there. Now when I click the plus sign again, I can pick a different kind of section. I'm going to go ahead and choose media this time. And I'm just going to grab a different picture. All right, so essentially I figure out what kind of material I want to put in, where I want to put it, which is why having the templates and having students think through how they want to structure their story map before they even get to this tool is really invaluable, because otherwise they get to this tool and they just start poking around with the buttons and they forget all about, well, they don't, doing them a disservice. They don't necessarily focus on the structure of the argument they're trying to make. So we try to really have them think through that before they even get to the tool, so that once they arrive at the tool, they know what they want to say, and it's just a matter of expressing it in this particular format. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and hit the save button. You need to hit the save button. It does not auto-save. And I'm going to go ahead and actually stop the share. We are at about 3:10. We've got about 20 minutes, and I want to make sure that we've got time to have some discussion at the end. So go ahead and take, let's just say like 5 minutes. I know it's not much at all. Just take 5 minutes to start working with the storymap tool, publishing it from your map like I just showed you. Okay, so a little bit after 3:15, we'll come back together and have some discussion. Okay, just take a minute or two to finish up. I realized that I gave you virtually no time to play with the story map. I apologize for that. One thing I wanted to show you earlier, but I couldn't find the link for it, is the template that we gave to the students in the summer biology class. It's the template behind the story map example that I showed you earlier, created by one of the students. I want to show you the template just so you have an idea of how it worked, and you know, how you create such a thing. So basically, I created a story map cascade, and I had placeholder text and images for the students. So we have the landing page here, which they then updated. But you can see that as they scrolled through, I had some prompts to describe to them what they were supposed to do in each section of the story map. So I have placeholder text in here, but it is attempting to model what I want them to do. So for example, citations. One of the things this story map cascade does real well is it gives you a section at the very bottom you can use for credits. So actually, if I go to the student's story map and go to the bottom, you can see that she has her credits. So she copied and pasted these citations from her Zotero bibliography, and she included the citations in the body of the story map. Okay, so I tried to model that for them in the story map. Eventually I ran out of things to say, so I used ipsum lorem to give them a rough idea of how much text each section should have, which frankly, I'm sure you all have gotten plenty of projects where either there's vague bullet points that say nothing, or there's like, you know, a giant essay dropped into the middle of a digital thing like a story map, and it's just kind of out of place. So the feedback that I got from the students was that it was really helpful to know roughly how much text they should be shooting for. And you can see that I put just cats and dog pictures. Part of the idea was I wanted to make sure it was really easy for students to recognize what was the placeholder stuff and what was their stuff, so that they could delete anything that they weren't using. So for example, if they weren't going to drop 2 images into this section, they can just go to the delete button, get rid of that cute little puppy dog, and they'd be good to go. Okay, so this approach seemed to work really well for the students because it kept them focused on the task at hand, which was presenting their case study using this very structured format that I gather biologists use. So with that, I'm gonna stop sharing and stop talking and ask if anyone has questions or feedback or anything else that they want to say before we wrap up today. I've gotten messages from a couple different project teams. Please contact me if you want to have a Zoom call. I'm all yours for the rest of the week, so I'd love to talk with you about your projects. think it's the afternoon lull. I'm sure everyone is as exhausted as I am.
I'm curious, Janine, if you encounter cases where someone says, I guess I'm curious about the times where someone says, you know, that story maps or ArcGIS in general is just not the thing for me. And I'm wondering what the reasons are, you know, usually if it's just a matter of like, you know, well, we don't have a U, you know, or something like that. You know, what are those reasons why people turn to other tools?
Yeah, absolutely. You know, so ArcGIS Online works well for me because I work with so many different classes and projects. It's helpful to go all in with one tool. However, it's not the best tool for every project or class, and I completely recognize that. I am lucky enough to have a really talented digital scholarship coordinator, Diane Chikaki, who works with a lot of humanities projects in particular that wanted to do network analysis or text encoding. So she does a lot of the Omeka and Gephi and other kinds of work. She also does a little bit of work with Scalar. So that's really helpful to have someone who can work with faculty on those things. Another thing that we have a fair number of faculty interested in is custom coded applications. We like to take our computer science undergrads and get them working with faculty on developing projects. So I was actually going to talk to the Mapping Cicero group about a project vaguely similar to theirs that one of our assistant faculty did with a computer science student using custom code, because he has really specific things that he wanted to do, and they couldn't easily be done, you know, with any out-of-the-box tools. I'm sorry, that's not a more specific answer, but yeah, I mean, I fully acknowledge that ArcGIS Online and story maps are not the right tool for everyone, and I'm totally happy to talk with people about other options. The thing that I could be most helpful with if it's not an ArcGIS Online type thing, is with the whole data development process, because like I said, that's one of the biggest time sinks. And you know, I've been working with GIS stuff for long enough that I've seen, you know, all sorts of different formats and can hopefully help you figure out how to get the stuff that you are working with into a format that could go into some kind of mapping tool, whether it's ArcGIS or another one. Micah, I can't post the link to that project because he took it down. I was going to get in touch with him. He left Bucknell, and I went to find it, but it's not active right now. So I was going to get in touch with him. His name's Tom Beasley. He's a classics faculty member. I'm not 100% sure where he landed, but he was doing something on. Well, I'll send you the project page. It's just the project itself is no longer up there. Okay, well, go ahead.
Sorry, one other question too. I was thinking back to one of your early slides about best practices, and actually I think some folks in the group here will later have a discussion just in general about best practices, and kind of blending these two topics of, you know, the data doesn't even exist yet, right? So the project team has some work to do before, or at least laying groundwork that students in a course, you know, may help to be part of the team that, you know, ends up, I guess, harvesting the data from various texts. But just in terms of best practices, and I guess just in terms of, I don't think scaffolding is the right word, maybe just scoping a project so that, you know, knowing that there's a lot of like upfront work to do before like an amazing story map can be created from the data. So I guess I'm just thinking, I guess from your experience in terms of scoping, you know, do you have times where you're approached by, say, a faculty member that wants to do a project, and you know, there's a negotiation or a discussion that says, well, maybe, you know, in this version of the course, we do this because in later versions, you know, we'll have things laid out, you know, like the metadata scheme. We'll know what those attributes are, and it'll be different each time we do it. But anyway, I'm just wondering what your
Yeah, that's a great question. And that happens all the time. And luckily, I mean, pretty much all the faculty that I work with, they really truly get that we got to walk before we can run. And since, I mean, like an overwhelming majority of the faculty that I work with, these kinds of digital scholarship projects that they do in the classroom are tied to their own research. So, you know, with a lot of like that American economic history class that had that crazy number of map layers, that's something that I've been working with a faculty member on for like 8 years. And we did a lot of that for her research work before we even thought about turning it into a classroom assignment. And it started small and then grew and then it scaled back because we got a little carried away. So yeah, I mean, they're very much evolving projects. And I think it took me a while to get okay with that because, like I said, before I got to Bucknell, I hadn't worked in academia, and it felt good to know that it's okay for things to be incrementally grown and to change over time. So
Great.
Can I just show everyone one super quick last thing that I thought of, because a number of people in the comments seem to like the templates. I don't know why, but it never occurred to me until I was working on this Animals and Pandemics class, that if I was making a template and it didn't have as much space as I wanted the students to have, in this case, I really wanted it to be like a limited number of pages, you can just go to the page setup and make it a much bigger canvas. I'm working on a project right now for a faculty member who doesn't want students to do anything in ArcGIS Online, but she wants all of their materials to end up in a Scalar project. So we have a template that's like a 11.5 by 18 format, so the students can easily see at a glance the individual sections, but still have space to put all their stuff in there without being overwhelmed by it taking 20 pages for one section. So that whole idea of like just making a bigger canvas for them to work with in a template, that really kind of rocked my world in a good way this summer. All right.
Excellent. We'll definitely, you know, with your permission and your colleagues' permission, share as many templates as we can, you know, along with the recording as well.
Great. Well, thanks everyone. I look forward to talking with you about your projects if that's something you want to do.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you. I don't know why my brain keeps wanting to call Eugene, but thank you very much, Janine.
You're welcome.
for your time and all the prep. The prep was amazing, making it so custom to us. So thank you very much.
Thanks. Have a great day, everyone.